Welcome to Church Pulse Weekly. It's Carey Nieuwhof here, along with David Kinnaman. Hello, David.
Hey, Carey. Good to see you.
It's good to see you too. Yeah, coming off a weekend, you and I, as we record this. But I'll tell you, it's nice that spring's here. It's raining in Southern California, so nobody knows what to do. Is that true?
It's exactly true. Yeah, our internet's out, so we're making all sorts of accommodations to make this happen. But hey, it's a podcast, so the show must go on.
It has to go on. Exactly. So I got a chance to sit down, as did you, with Andy Stanley a few months ago at, a little while ago. It's more like a month ago at the State of Your Church webcast. And we're going to bring you a lot of that conversation today. We're actually going to air an extended version of it on my leadership podcast, I think in a month or two, maybe in May of this year. But Andy, as always, had a lot to say. And we talked to him about a couple of statistics. The one that we've talked about a lot on this show, David, is dealing with pastoral burnout. So just remind us again what that stat was before we hear from Andy.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the very beginning of 2021, it was 29% of pastors who said they'd given real serious consideration to quitting full-time ministry. And then by the end of 2021, the number was up to 38%, 2 in 5. And we've just repeated this study. We haven't fully done all the work on it, but it looks like that number is actually going to grow again, not by as much as the last time, but the percentages seems to be increasing. We'll save it for another day.
We'll save that for another day.
But it's, I was reading, looks like the number's getting higher.
Wow, I was reading in. What was it? It was a Harvard Business Review on the weekend, and they were talking about, is it the Great Resignation or the Great Reshuffle? And they were framing it in terms of everybody's rethinking everything. And I think it was a really, you can look that up if you want to Google it, HBR, Great Resignation or Great Reshuffle. Really fascinating take on it. But I picked Andy's brain on that to see what he had to say about it. So, okay, well, that number is going up. Did that surprise you?
I don't think so. I mean, I think as much as we've been talking to pastors on the show and, in our work, it seems to me like this is such an interesting moment and such a tough one. And so I think the fact that the number, if nothing else, the percentage that we're seeing in our most recent spring 2022 data is corroborating. It's like the 38% wasn't at aberration. And again, it looks like it's going to be just up over 40%, 42% is what it's coming in at, but we've got some more work to do to double check it, but we're not quite ready to sort of release it. But
wow.
But that number sort of seems like it's trending with the ongoing nature of the pandemic and this great reshuffle and so many questions being raised about how to do ministry. And I think that's the heart of the matter, right? It's not just that the pandemic is sort of fading in some ways. Obviously, there's still many aspects of it that are still salient for people. But I think the fact that attendance hasn't returned to normal for many people, the expectations, the psychological impact hasn't at all subsided. I think like many other industries, pastors are going through that kind of soul searching of is this really what we want to do? And so I think it's so important for us to talk about resilience and longevity and hearing the Lord's voice very specifically in our unique moments about what he is asking us to do.
It's pretty normal, and I know I've done this once or twice in my life, but to doubt your vocational ministry. What are the statistics showing about how many Protestant senior pastors have done that? Just like, should I be in ministry at all? Is that what the question's asking?
Yeah, exactly. Half of Protestant senior pastors, 51%, said that they had doubted their decision to be in ministry as a vocation at some point, which I think is, again, pretty
So this
normal.
could be over a decade, not necessarily as a response to COVID.
Correct, yeah. But that, I think, is still an important finding. And then confidence in calling, 35% of pastors say they feel more confident about their calling compared to when they first entered ministry, so only 1/3. So, again, I think on the one hand, I'd like to sort of be a beacon of hope in this. On the one hand, for those half of Protestant pastors who say they haven't doubted their vocational ministry, good on you. That's great, right? And I think for those who say they have, it's entirely normal. There's something humble about that. I think there's something really profound and a very humble posture about us saying, God, is this really what you told me to do? And that's okay too.
Yeah, and sometimes that confirms your calling, and sometimes it reveals something that you need to pay attention to. Well,
Right.
we've got the whole extended interview for Andy Stanley and for a lot of the guests that we hosted at the State of Your Church. And you can go to barna.com/access. And as a special bonus for our listeners, if you use the code ChurchPulse, all one word, you'll get 20% off an annual subscription. Well, David, with that said, let's jump into my conversation with Andy Stanley. Andy, as many of you know, founded Atlanta-based North Point Ministries in 1995. Today, North Point Ministries consists of 8 churches in the Atlanta area and a network of nearly 130 churches around the globe that collectively serve about 185,000 people weekly. A survey of U.S. Pastors and Outreach magazine identified Andy as one of the 10 most influential living pastors in America. It's always a privilege to sit down with him, so here's an excerpt from that interview. Andy, it's good to be with you.
It's always good to be with you, Kerry.
So, the theme of this webcast has been measuring what matters in ministry. And over the last 2 years, all of our metrics have just been thrown out the window. The stuff we counted on for decades, we can't count on. In your opinion, what do you think pastors should be measuring as we look to the future? And maybe even what do you have your eye on?
Well, there's just the basic stuff. I don't know any of that has changed in terms of just the blocking and tackling of church. I mean, for us, we reopened late, as everybody seems to know, and continues to make fun of us for, which is fine. But when we came back in, we found ourselves more attuned to families. Not spending a lot of time trying to get people who are hesitant to come back, but to focus on the people who are walking through the doors. And it's kind of the same stuff. It's reaching unchurched people, being attuned to who's walking through the doors, what do they need, what can we do for them. So I don't know in terms of what we're measuring, anything has changed significantly. Maybe it should. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah.
In fact, I think you have a theory about this.
Well, we were talking ahead of time, a little theory, but again, I haven't been in the lead pastor seat, which you are still in for a few years.
But that means you're a consultant and a professional.
So I just give my opinion
That's
and
right,
fly home.
yeah.
Right. I think about it because I think even, when I was a pastor, I was used to seeing things sort of move in a progress direction, but we also had a real reset. Mm-hmm. I remember in 2009, after we launched Connexus, I grew the church from about 1,000 down to about 400 just through my skillful preaching.
We were so happy to be connected with you.
That's right. At that time, you're like, we don't have a partner.
Tell us how you did it, I think is what we said.
we don't have a partner in Canada, just if anyone's asking. Yeah. But it was one of those things where, we left an almost paid for building that was beautiful and brand new and went into theaters and really got serious about reaching the unchurched. And I think there almost came a moment where I'm like, we can't worry about the people who left. They're not coming back. And we just have to focus on the people who are here. And what I did was...
And the people you're reaching.
And the people we're reaching.
Because for you, that was a major shift. It's why you declined. It was a purposeful, mission-driven decline.
It was. It was totally supposed to be a mission-driven decline. I'm sure I exacerbated it a little bit through something I did or didn't do right. But, and then I just said, we got to focus on who's here, not worry about the people who have left, and just look to the future. And I gave a bunch of calls out to people saying, look, if this church isn't exciting enough to invite your friends to, then, we shouldn't be in existence. And that grew from that handful or several hundred people to what became a church of 3,000 or 4,000 by the time I left the lead pastor role, and about 1,500 on the weekend. And so we grew it back, but it wasn't by getting people back, it was by focusing on who was in the room. Another metric that's really interesting, I used to get a report all the time. I was talking to Scott Sauls about it in between, moments in this webinar. But it was 5 categories of giving. New givers, people who would increase their giving, people who were just stable in their giving, slight decline, and then stopped giving. And the stories were always on the margins. People who were new, and I'll bet, at North Point, you have new givers that you never had before. You've got people who've increased their giving, which is probably a sign of devotion. You've also got people who have fallen off, which you would think, they just don't like us anymore. But what I discovered when someone made a phone call is that often there was some life situation, someone got laid off, or a child had some needs that needed financial attention. There was almost a pastoral story. And then even for the final column, the people who were leaving, there was that. And then I would also track new baptisms and new people who are taking steps. So new people So maybe the number's smaller.
So you're saying these are the things that you measured then that you think we will probably just always continue to measure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. In fact, this morning, Joel Thomas, who just came back to take Buckhead Church, he did a similar thing in Gilbert at the church he was pastoring before he came back to work for us. In fact, we had the discussion this morning about, because when people stop giving, there's always this sensitivity. You don't want them to think, oh no, we're just after your money, and they haven't heard from us in any other capacity, and suddenly they stop giving and they get a phone call. That's just weird, right? And he said exactly what you said. He said, we found a way to connect with those people, and it became very pastoral for the very reasons you gave. There'd been a life change. They've not, we don't know about it, or the people who are in their small group haven't contacted the church because they're engaged with that family, but the church hasn't officially engaged because we don't know. He said, in many of those conversations or those phone calls resulted in pastoral moments. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And so, that's an awkward call to make, but it's part of what the church does, and it's part of staying engaged with people.
We were at another event recently together, and I heard you say something that I've heard you say many times over the years, but it just fell like fresh information. But you talked about, okay, so North Point hasn't been immune from people who aren't coming back. The room is not as full as it used to be. Yep. But you talked about, okay, look at the fundamentals here. We have money in the bank. We have empty seats at optimal times. Mm-hmm. And I thought, boy, that is a very different perspective than focusing on who's not here. Do you want to talk about the importance of empty seats at optimal times to church growth?
Yeah, I right before I came to have this conversation, I met with 30 new staff, and this is one of the things that we talked about. I said to them, hey, you've come to work for us at an extraordinary time because it's ideal. We have space, we have financial resources, we have people resources, the mission's the same, and it's never been easier to attend one of our local churches. And so, it's like God said, here's all these resources. What are you gonna do to build my kingdom? So, of course we want people to come back, and people who are gonna come back, they're gonna come back. But in terms of energy around, there's no point trying to talk adults into coming back to church, right? They know where we are. They're in group, and many of them continue to give. So for us, in terms of reaching unchurched people or re-engaging people who've been away from the church for years, we feel like we're in the opportunities have never been better. And again, there's no one size fits all when it comes to church or church strategies. Right. You know that. But in our particular communities in the Atlanta area where we are, the density, the populations have increased in some cases significantly. In fact, we were just talking to you 15 years ago when you came to where we are right now, because we're right next door to North Point Community Church. It's like a different, if you dropped in from 10 years ago, or if you dropped in and hadn't been here in 10 years, you wouldn't even know where you were.
No.
So in most of our communities, the density has increased, the people have come to us, and we have no excuse. Goodness, I feel like we're more purposeful and more on mission than ever before, with fewer excuses than ever before. And the pandemic was, difficult. We lost families, we lost people through all the political turmoil as well. But in terms of opportunities to reach unchurched people, it's never been better. I've never been more excited. And so back to your original question, in terms of what we measure, it's going to fall in that big bucket of measuring things strategically in light of what we are there to do.
So we may have partially answered this question already, because I love the angle you're looking at empty seats at optimal times, right? But Barna data has revealed that 38% of pastors have seriously considered leaving full-time ministry, not just their church, but I'm going to go sell insurance or something like that. What would you say to pastors who are watching this, who are saying, Andy, I love that, but I'm still really discouraged?
Well, I'm a preacher's kid. I think preacher's kids sometimes have a little bit different perspective. Pastoring church work is difficult. It's Groundhog Day. It's Christmas, and then it's Easter, and then it's summer, and then it's Christmas, and then it's Easter and summer, and then there's Sunday. So if you don't love this, and if you aren't experiencing some kind of encouragement in terms of life change or something that says, I'm what God called me to do, I'm seeing it happen, it can be extremely discouraging. So I say to pastors, when we have these conversations, look, if you feel like you need to get out, get out, but don't give up. And maybe it's a not for now, but not forever, not for now, but not forever. Hey, take a break. This doesn't mean you're abandoning your calling. It means you're being redeployed somewhere else. But don't close the door on pastoring, and don't close the door on ministry. But if you need a break, figure out a way to get out, because if you stay in too long, you just get cynical, you get critical, you get negative, and if you stay in too long, you run the risk of losing not just your passion for ministry, you run the risk of losing your faith.
Yeah.
Right? And we've seen that. So don't stay in this so long that you lose your faith, or that your kids do, or that you lose your marriage because, hey, I don't know what else I'm going to do. So I've never been critical of pastors, or not even just pastors, people who have vocational ministers of any sort and any level in a church who've said, you know what, I got to get out. It's like, get out. You're not being unfaithful to God. You're being faithful to your health. You're being faithful to your family. You're being faithful to your sanity. And you're not out of the ministry. You're just not working at a church. And that's okay. But don't close the door permanently in your mind or heart about your involvement in the local church, because new seasons bring new energy and new opportunities. So that's,
It's another fresh take. Personal question. Why haven't you quit? You've been at this for a while.
Yeah. Gosh, I don't want to quit. I shared this with the group we were with last week, and I'm not making this up. If Sandra were here, she would tell you, I have never been more excited about Sunday morning.
Wow.
I love preaching as much as I've ever loved it. I've loved preparation. I love showing up. And it's interesting because there are fewer people. We're running about 60% of where we were in 2019. And that just doesn't bother me. And it's not because I'm so mature and so spiritual. I think I just love church. And because, we quit meeting, in person for so long, I missed it. I love being back. I feel like we have more opportunity than ever. And the people who are there I feel like they're more missional and more missionally engaged, because the people that quit coming were, the people that were probably coming once a month or, every once in a while anyway, maybe, I don't know that for sure. So I feel like the people who are there, there's more energy and more excitement. And we, again, like anyone who paid attention to what happened in 2020, we learned so many things organizationally. We learned so many things in terms of how to do some things more efficiently, better, and we're bringing all that new learning into what we're doing now. And I've never been more excited or more energized, so I don't want to quit.
I think one of the first books I ever read that you wrote was Next Generation Leader. You've been passionate about next generation leaders for a long time. What do you think, if anything, the pandemic has done to the next generation of leaders as you look around at sort of that younger generation at North Point
and church
around?
Leaders?
Yeah, church leaders.
Well, here's just in our church context specifically, what they saw, and again, my meeting right before this one, I was with these 30 new employees. Most of them it's their first real job. We kind of went around there, which is so interesting. They're right out of college or graduate school, or we have a residence program. They're right out of seminary. And the ones that tracked with us, that came in early enough in 2019 to say, oh, here's how it's normally done, then experienced the transition into the pandemic, and now have experienced the transition back into, meeting on a regular basis. What they experienced is, and this makes me very proud of our organization, is that we truly are mission driven. We are not program driven. I say all the time, marry the mission, date the model, marry the mission. Well, when we decided not to meet in person, we were nimble enough and redeployed our resources and our staff to do extraordinary ministry in the community and went digital so quickly. I mean, we transitioned so quickly. And then when we began to slowly open up, to transition back but carry some of that digital learning, what it said to that generation, which is what they need to know, is we're not stuck in our old ways. If you work in an organization for 2 years, it's tempting to say, oh, they're never going to change. If you work in an organization 10 years, you experience some of that change. So what it did is it compressed this timeline, and it said to them, wow, the leader may be older, but this isn't a nimble organization. They turned on a dime, really almost overnight.
Right.
Our church was not closed. Goodness, we did more things in some capacity than we've ever done before. And so transitioning to digital with community impact, transitioning back to live with community impact, digital to live, it was a lot of change, but it was because, our mission wasn't to have a Sunday morning service with people shoulder to shoulder in a room. That's not our mission. That's a model. And we were able to abandon that part of the model for the sake of staying on mission during the pandemic. So for millennials, and we're all kind of tired of that word, for the 30-year-olds and especially the 20-year-olds, it was like this, then it was this, then we're back to this. So I think there was a sense of this is not an organization that is married to the model, because we pretty much put our entire Sunday model on hold in order to transition to something that was mission-centered. So I think that was a great experience for a lot of them. And I came out of that encouraged that our organization really is mission-driven rather than, oh no, we can't work our model, so we're paralyzed until the pandemic's over, or we can get back in the building. And I'm not being critical at all of churches that reopened way earlier than us. Again, every community is different, every city's different. But that was our experience. And too, Carrie, I think that's one reason I've come out of this more excited about our local churches and pastoring, because it was a whirlwind of change, and I love change, and it just made me proud of our local churches.
So as we look to the future, and you think ahead, are there other parts of the model that you want to re-examine or you think may not be as promising as they once were?
Our ministry model?
Yeah.
We are we're in constant conversation about that. We really are. And I can't think of anything specific that I would say, hey, we're not going to do this anymore. We developed some skills during the pandemic, and we didn't have in-person services for a little over a year.
Yeah.
So it was a long stretch. And so we developed we had a bunch of reps with digital captures that I feel like I got better with working off teleprompter. We learned how to capture in our auditorium with about 40 people and make it feel like, the room is full. So we will continue. It just created some skills that we'd never had to develop. This sounds crazy, but many of our campuses, we have large open spaces, lawns. Like we have 4 acres of grass right out front of North Point. And occasionally in the past, we would take advantage of that space. Well, during the pandemic, again, this is why people say, "Oh, you closed your church." It's like, no, we did so many things on the lawn, but we learned to use our lawn and use it efficiently. Well, that learning we're going to continue to carry forward. We created a brand new Christmas tradition during the pandemic that we did outside, and it worked so well. We did it this Christmas as well. So, again, we haven't abandoned any pieces of the model because, again, the model isn't programming. The model is a model that you adapt programming and develop programming for. So, I can't think of anything that we, would abandon in terms of the model specifically.
Well, you're one of the finest communicators I've ever heard, and many people have ever heard. Talk about the difference between speaking to an empty room teleprompter versus a live crowd. Were you glad to see the live crowd back?
Oh my goodness, yes, goodness. But, and this may be irrelevant, so just stop me if this is too much. So, the first couple Sundays, because I've spoken to empty rooms before. I mean, you do that from time to time. But unfortunately, I did what you normally do. I tried to do something new the old way, and it was horrible. So I went after the third week to 100% teleprompter. So for almost a year, I preached teleprompter messages. I scripted out the whole thing. You still use the OLED on stage, but I was reading my sermons, and I got good at it because I would always watch it, and I learned what to do with my eyes. I learned to look away. I learned to walk around. I didn't pretend like there were people in the room. I didn't look around like the room is full. I didn't do that. That's not good. So it was straight to camera, but it's 35 minutes of reading a teleprompter without trying to look like I read a teleprompter. And
that's a skill.
Well, it is a skill. It's a skill you never develop unless you have to.
Right.
And I'll tell you where I was challenged with this originally, and you may laugh. Years ago, Glenn Beck had his 4:30 or 4 o'clock show on Fox News.
Right.
he was doing this thing. He wanted to do some big thing for the religious leaders on the mall in D.C. And so he invited a bunch of us. He wanted to have a meeting. So the meeting, I never participated in what the meeting was about, but part of the visit, we got to sit in on a show. And I watched Glenn Beck use a combination of teleprompter and live, and it was brilliant. Regardless of what you think about Glenn Beck, it was, and I came home and I told our team, I want to learn to do that. I want to learn as a communicator to be able to leverage both genres at the same. It was so amazing. So I began, working on teleprompter skills. Well, then COVID comes along, and it's a good thing, but it forced me to manuscript, read it without looking like I'm reading it, and then when all that went away, I was so happy to, communicate to a live audience. But I still am able to do that. And now when we do our one-offs or when we do promos for stuff, it's a muscle exercise for a year. And as a communicator, you want to get better and you want to learn new things, and it forced us to learn some new things.
Shifting gears a little bit, you talk a lot about your father, Charles Stanley, and he just stepped back from full-time vocational ministry. Finally.
This
How
past
old
fall,
was
89.
89.
Yeah, he was 88, and he finally said, I think I need to. But it was during his church, First Baptist Atlanta, was still closed down because of the pandemic. They hadn't reopened. So he resigned without these church meeting. So he didn't get to preach his last sermon. He didn't get to walk out there in front of the audience and say his fond farewell. So we wrote a script together and he recorded it. And so I hated that for him, that he didn't get to have his final Sunday after being the pastor there 50 years.
My goodness.
But he knew, I'm probably not gonna be able to go back. And he'd already put a successor in place. So all of that was, it was smooth, but 89. But I used to say, Dad, you've got to retire so I can retire. I cannot retire before you. So please, don't,
point.
I'm not going to do this till I'm 89 years old. But he's just bored. So.
So think about legacy for a moment. And, you're going to have a legacy. We all have a legacy one way or the other. And we've seen a lot of instances of pastors who've had a very different legacy than anyone would have hoped for.
Yeah.
What are some keys in your mind to finishing well?
Finishing well or legacy?
Well, take it how you want.
Well, just thinking about our churches as an organization, it needs to be stronger than ever, more focused than ever, better staffed than ever, better led than ever, better preached than ever. So part of my responsibility is to hand those things off in a timely way so that when I disappear, ideally, nobody misses me.
Right.
Hopefully, even if they don't remember me, they don't need to miss my leadership. They don't need to miss my communication. So part of my responsibility is to hand it off. And again, as you know, in large church, there's the preaching piece, the communication piece, and there's the leadership piece. And so I I wear a lot of the mantle for both of those, and I'm slowly, transitioning or handing some of that off. So success, of course, is succession, and that's the goal.
You're right. That is part of your legacy, because a lot of people.
In terms of legacy, I hope my legacy, a part of my legacy is, we're not sure when he left, but they don't. It's as good as it's ever been or better.
That's a really good point, because often pastors wait until the point where it's a shadow of what it was, COVID notwithstanding.
Right.
Here, you take this.
Right.
So you're saying part of that is
I would feel like a failure if that were the case.
Right.
And time will tell, right? And nobody knows what tomorrow holds. But to your point, we've seen it done not so well, and we've seen it done well. And when I meet with our new staff today, again, I keep referencing that. One of the things I say to young staff is, you're going to feel like from time to time nobody's listening to you. You'll have all these great ideas, and your great ideas don't get implemented, and you're going to be tempted to think they aren't listening, they don't care. And I say to the new staff, I say, look at me, I am they. And if you will, just for a minute, put yourself in my shoes, could anyone possibly care more about this church than me? And the answer is no. I love our church and I love our organization. So when you hear that little voice in your head says they don't care, you just remember, I am they, so to speak, and no one cares more. So in terms of legacy and success, because I love our churches and I love our organization, the continuing effective ministry is beyond me is success for me. I mean, that's the way I think about it, and I genuinely feel that way. And for founders, it's a little different than somebody who, you know, comes to a church and inherits a model and everything else. So it's a little bit different and it's trickier. And succession in a multi-site church, as we're learning, can be very tricky. And again, this is a relatively new thing for founders of multi-site churches to transition. And it's interesting to see how well it's done and how unwell it's done at times. And it's generally nobody's fault. It's new territory.
So what I want to focus on for the rest of our time together, because we could go in so many different directions, is you got a new book called Not In It to Win It. And I'm very anxious to crack a copy, Andy, because I know we talked a couple of years ago at the beginning of the pandemic. And it was one of those things where people were leaving churches left, right, and center, jumping off the boat. And you did a number of phone calls. We talked about it on my podcast. Quite a few phone calls of people who had left mad. And you said, and correct me if I'm quoting you wrong, not one of them was theological. It was all ideological or political.
Yeah.
Let's pick up where we left off. How has the political, ideological dialogue either infected or affected the church and intensified over the last 2 years?
Well, speaking for me and multiple pastors you've probably heard from or spoken to as many as I have, you know, it's like, so just to be very specific, you know, these are generally Republicans who were upset with me and upset with their pastors because we wouldn't take a stand, which really means we wouldn't take their stand, because we were taking a stand. We just weren't standing where they were standing. And in these phone calls and the conversations, and I always made sure they ended friendly. So these weren't hostile, but the emails, and you know, an email can be hostile, voicemail hostile. Then you get the person on the phone, it's like the temperature comes down. So that's why I called all these people, because the ones I called had been engaged and active. These weren't, you know, just internet people, you know, bombing us, right? And to your point, once we got past all the rhetoric, they were just mad that I wouldn't take a stand and that I had bought into the Democrats' narrative, and we were shutting down the church because the government was forcing us to. And I'm like, state of Georgia, the governor never asked us to shut down. And where it didn't exactly hurt my feelings, but it was disturbing. The reason we gave for suspending in-person services is the actual reason we suspended in-person services. And they just didn't believe us. That's what it came down to. I said, no, this wasn't government pressure. We're trying to be a good neighbor. And even though you don't think we should not have potential super spreader events, the people we're trying to reach are convinced we shouldn't have super spreader events. So this is actually missional. We are trying to impact our neighbors and our neighborhoods, and this is how we be good neighbors and, you know, be good in our neighborhood. So nobody's pressuring us to do this. We are trying to endear, this is one of our words, you know, we are endearing ourselves to the community, and this is one of the ways that we're doing it. This is missional. They just weren't buying it.
I was going to say, that didn't change your mind, did it?
Nope, you bought it. And then I hear all the Republican talking points, like I live in a cave. I'm like, okay, you didn't make any of that up. Okay, I hear the same things. Anyway, it was so frustrating. Now for us, you know, we're a big church, we're gonna survive all that. But as you know, there are pastors all over in medium-sized to small churches. They didn't survive. This is, you know, men and women decided, I'm out. These people are crazy. I can't do this. And I'm very conservative, and I'm conservative politically. Yeah. But when we say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag in the United States, you may not know this.
Being Canadian.
We say, and it was added in 1957 or 58, one nation under God. Every time a conservative Republican says the Pledge of Allegiance, they declare what we were modeling. It's one nation, but it's under God. I mean, and no one would disagree. It's It's God first, nation second. No one would disagree with that. That is what fueled and drove our decisions. And when a family, a community, or a nation is under God, it's a better family, nation, and community. And the responsibility of the church is to be the conscience of the nation so that the nation is blessable under the canopy of, you know, following God. And I'm not quoting scripture. That's not, I don't have any verses to back that up. That's just, you know, wherever the church thrives, people thrive. And wherever the church has influence, people thrive. And so, but there was just a group of people, they were not buying it. They still don't buy it. And I hope they come back someday.
So I don't know how long you've been talking about this, but this is not a new concern of yours. I remember series that probably go back a decade where you would try to talk about the divide that existed. It's probably only intensified over the last couple of years.
Yep.
Why do you think, do you have a theory on why people are more passionate about their ideology than their theology?
Yes, because there is no money to be made in the middle, and you can't even market anything in the middle. Wow. Right? You market and make money on the extremes. And I'm not knocking anything, that's just reality. There's nothing in the middle, but except that's where you solve problems. Problems are solved in the middle, shared experiences happen in the middle. I have that sense of, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't know that. I always thought. You learn in the middle, but you market and you make money in the extremes. So during a political season, you know, all the money and all the influence, you know, it all runs to the extremes. And then add to that, ginning up things that are on both sides that are not true. And it's the fear factor. And you gain followers with this message. So anybody that's looking for a message to gain followers, here's how you do it. Here's what's going to happen if you don't, and I'm going to ensure that it doesn't. Here's what's going to happen. Here's what's going to happen, but I'm going to keep that from happening. So I'm going to give you something to be afraid of, and then I'm going to offer myself as the solution. That's how you win elections. That's how you raise money. That's never going to change, and I'm not even trying to change that. But Christians should be smarter than that. This isn't new. We've been manipulated that way by products, by politicians. You know, this isn't new. But you would think Christians who, the command reiterated and repeated more than anything else in the New Testament is, fear not. Fear not, I am with you. So we should have the objectivity as believers to listen to all that, laugh about it, joke about it, vote for our candidate of choice, but not fall for the, here's what you should be afraid of, but fear not, I'm here to keep that from happening. So, goodness, it's just disappointing because the church, and when I say the middle, people immediately quote Revelation to me, don't be hot or cold, but lukewarm, you're lukewarm. I'm like, that's not what Jesus was talking about. But anyway, the middle is where people understand other people. The middle is where ministry is done. And it's not about compromise, it's about loving people. And you can't love on the extremes because the other trick is this. In this world, the goal, and this is very important, the goal is always to look like you're losing. The goal is never to win. If you win, the tension goes away. You can't raise any money. You can't get more followers. Yeah. So the goal is there's an enemy and they're winning. So you need to buckle down and you need to swing further left or further right because we're losing. The goal is to appear as if you're losing so you can gain more followers and raise more money. And that's absurd. And most Americans should be smarter than that, but Christians, again, none of this is new, right?
No.
So,
but has it intensified?
Oh, yeah.
Like
it's intensified because of social media. Everybody has a microphone and an opinion. That's the new thing in the mix. So, and that's not going to change.
Well, Doris Kearns Goodwin, the historian, she wrote Leadership in Turbulent Times. She argues that Lyndon B. Johnson, 1960s, was the last politician who really did a good job of going across the House, because that's how the Great Society got passed, et cetera.
So much civil rights legislation and progress was made in that area.
In the 90s, another theory, Congress, people of Congress who went to Congress, they stopped living in Washington.
Yep.
And they started going home to
their
their
relationships evaporated.
Yeah, talk about that.
Well, there's no shared experience. We're not friends anymore. Only time I see you is when we're arguing about something, and then I go back and surround myself with my constituency, and you go and surround yourself with your constituency and get them all ginned up, and it's a recipe for division.
The argument was, even in the Reagan era or the early Clinton years, I might be on one side of the aisle, you're on the other, but we see each other at the ball game, we see each other at church, we see each other in restaurants. When you no longer live in Washington,
Shared experience.
That shared experience. Do you argue, or could you argue, because I haven't read the manuscript, that got intensified during the pandemic because we didn't see anybody? It was me and my little loop with people who were more extreme than me.
Well, it's a perfect storm. We had amped up racial division and issues, which were real and important, political, and the pandemic, all together at one time. Yeah, and isolation, and 800,000, 800,000 people died, and vaccine, no vaccine, 1, 2, 3 doses, no doses, and then all the conspiracy theories. Yeah, it was a mess. But, and correct me if you think I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Just read the New Testament. This isn't complicated. This is, I'm a Jesus follower, which means I'm not going to be critical. I'm not going to do anything to diminish my influence with anybody. In fact, I'm going to do everything I can to gain influence with the people I want to influence. That one simple idea that, it's New Testament through and through. It's the Apostle Paul. I will become all things to all people in order that I might win some. If the church had just been locked in on that one simple idea, it would have been impossible to divide us, even though we don't agree politically, because differences of opinion are a reality, but division is a choice. Division is always 100% a choice. Difference of opinions, difference of perspectives, that's healthy, but division is a choice. The church chose to be divided. It was no longer one nation under God. It was, I'm going to drape my religion all over my politics and proof text it. And then pastors all over the place facilitated that. And anyway.
And to be fair, I know you would make this point. It's not just the right, it's also the left. You can go to other denominations, it's totally progressive,
absolutely. I'm just in the churches
Democrat.
that lean more right, and I lean more right politically. In fact, in the book's called Not In It to Win It, I stay up front. I'm choosing my pronoun, on purpose. This is we. This isn't you. This is we. I'm a Christian, and I'm an evangelical. So when I talk about how evangelicals miss the opportunity of a lifetime, I can't point my finger because the Apostle Paul said, we're a body, and he didn't say you get to choose. You're a body because God appointed you as part of the body. So I'm part of this body, and the body always rises and falls together. So this is a we problem, and I'm part of the problem, and I want to be part of the solution. So I'm not shaking my finger at anybody.
Which is mature, because it's easy
I have
to
moments of
separate
maturity,
that.
yes.
Why have Christians drunk the Kool-Aid on this? The partisan ideological Kool-Aid on both sides of the spectrum. Why have we fallen for a narrative that isn't the church?
I guess I don't know, but as a pastor, I feel like it's a failure of discipleship, because the solution or the perspective that should be maintained is throughout the New Testament. And think about this. The Apostle Paul shows up in a culture where he's got, we have two buckets. Everything's politicized, red or blue, right? There's no middle ground. He had three. He had Rome, he had local priesthoods and religions, and he had the temple.
Yeah.
And he refused to get in any of those buckets. He was attacked from all three sides, and he refused to go either way. And that's why we're still talking about him. And it's why his literature, his letters, shaped Western civilization. If he had gone empire, local priesthood, or temple, we wouldn't have heard about him. And so, and then again, the other thing is too, you follow Jesus through the Gospels, and both sides, we're trying to have a piece of Jesus. I want you to, whose side is he on? And he refused. That's why we're still talking about him, because he's the Lord. He's not a constituency. He didn't, when he said, I'm going to build my church, that means this is something brand new. This is something unique. It's not going to fit in any of the buckets. And as Christians, we should be politically active. We should be socially active. We should vote our Christ-informed conscience. But at the end of the day, I should have more in common with Christians who are on the other side of the political divide than I have with people who are not Christian.
Right.
But one of the things I say in the book, like, hey, would Would you be more disappointed if your son or daughter lost their faith or changed politics? We know the right answer to that. I don't want them to lose their faith, but I don't want them to become a Republican. I don't want them to become a Democrat. Well, which one would bother you most? Is it one nation under God or one God under nation? And we know the right answers, but it becomes so emotionally charged. And I'll shut up after this.
No.
When Jesus in John 17, he could have prayed for anything. The only time we catch Jesus praying for those that will come to faith through the testimony of the apostles and the generations after that, the only thing he prays for is unity. The enemy of the church is not a political party. The enemy of the church is disunity, period. Because imagine what would happen in our neighborhoods in our country if the church came together around the Great Commandment, the Great Commission, red, yellow, black, and white, Republican or Democrat. Hey, you'll never divide us. You can market to us, you can bait us, but you'll never divide us. Well, when that happens, the world begins to change. And during the pandemic, it's why I believe we had the greatest opportunity of our lifetime as the church to make a difference. And we got in a spitting match with mayors and governors and local municipalities and the other party, and we missed an opportunity. So
I'd be tempted to close right there because it's such a hopeful note. But I want to ask you one more question.
There
Andy.
is hope. There's always hope, right?
There's always
Yeah.
hope. Why do you think so many people are looking to theocracy, the government as the answer? In other words, a government infused with Christian values, or Christian as on the Supreme Court, as president, in Congress. Why do we see the fusion of church and state as the answer? Or not everybody does,
Yeah,
but
no, I was
many
gonna
people
say-
do. I've seen it more. I have a degree in history and political science. I'm seeing it
But you
more in
probably have
this
a better
moment.
answer to that than I
I
do,
don't know. I mean, it's never worked.
I just feel like, you know what, my opinion,
Yeah.
we have married people to the Bible. We have not married people to following Jesus. Because if you decide I'm going to be a Jesus follower, there's no room for any of that. There's zero room for any of that. Because Jesus was so clear, the Apostle Paul was so clear on all of these things. And when the Apostle Paul's eyes were open on the road to Damascus, he saw everything different. Think about this.
Yeah.
He went from someone who could leverage violence for the sake of doing God's will to someone who abandoned all things violence as a Jesus follower. Because there's no room for war imagery. There's no win for, conquer and divide imagery. There's no room for, hey, if we get the right person in, the world's going to change and we're going to, Christianize America. All that nonsense. All you got to do is read the New Testament. And there is a way forward, but that is not the way. That is basically leveraging the rules and the ways of the kingdoms of this world to somehow create an end that represents the kingdom of God. And Jesus was so clear. He was the king who came to reverse the order of things. And the moment we try to unreverse, we become a constituency and a voting bloc, and game over.
Andy, I can't wait to read the book. It's called Not In It to Win It. And
Why choosing sides sidelines the church, subtitle.
well, I'm going to be digging in. Andy, thanks for spending time
Thanks,
with us
Gary.
again today. Appreciate you so much.
Well, always great to sit down with Andy Stanley, and he never disappoints. If you want the full conversation, head on over to barna.com/access, and you'll get the whole State of Your Church download. You'll get not only the full interview with Andy, you'll also get the interviews with Ed Stetzer and many of the other contributors. And if you use the word Church Pulse, you'll get 20% off. That's just Church Pulse, all one word. You'll get 20% off your annual subscription. Well, thank you so much for listening. If this episode helped you, please leave a rating and review, and we'll catch you next time on Church Pulse Weekly.